Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Michelle Hayward with Positive Hire, and I have a great friend who is joining us today, Clarissa Silva. She is a behavioral scientist, and we're going to be talking about a different viewpoint, a different aspect of how employers can look at their BIPOC employees through behavioral science. And so this is Clarissa's area of expertise, and I'm really, really excited to have her. Clarissa has an extensive background and experience not only in behavioral science, but in also in infectious disease and how it has impacted Black and Hispanic communities and tied back to behavioral science. So when we think about not any type of engagement, reaction, response that we have as humans, I don't know. Is that behavioral science, Clarissa? So Clarissa's going to define behavioral science for us. We're going to go into some definitions. Then we're going to have a more in-depth discussion about behavioral science as it relates to BIPOC employees. So Clarissa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's an honor to be here. Um, I'm super excited about today. Behavioral science has been kind of like this new. Everybody is incorporating into their divisions, units, products, all types of different use cases of how to utilize behavioral science. So my area of specialty is to really focus on interventions that try to improve outcomes that are either health related, wellness related. That's the key area of my work. I was trained at the University of Michigan, where I specialized in infectious disease. I was looking at disease risk and how to create interventions to prevent health disparity and risk amongst vulnerable populations, especially the Black and Latino populations. So that's how I started my work, and that spans about 20 something years of my career. Before I started my own research consulting practice, I started in 2016, right, and I started by developing out different models that were really focused on really examining outcomes and impact based on user experience. So you know, we started really examining a lot of different contracts in a lot of different places from just a marketing perspective and really user experience enhancement, right? And so we were always examining how can we best impact each user, how do we best impact each interaction that's happening when a product is being used. So that's how we first started off the company. um, so in a broad sense, behavioral science is really the marriage of economics and psychology and human behavior, right? So what it tries to do from a consumer perspective is look at the irrationality in decision making. And what we try to do in the group settings, right, like corporate and employee based, is to look at the employee in the environment, right? And now workforce environment is no longer that same fixed variable, right? So now environments change into working from home, hybridized models, caregiving in the same setting. So we look at all these different interactions to see what really creates employee satisfaction, what creates employee retention, what creates a wellness portrait for your employees, right? So that's some of the ways that behavioral science is used to enhance workforce wellness and really look into what ways do we improve and retain our talent.
Thank you for that, Clarissa. A question that came up for me as you were talking was the irrational responses humans have. Can we talk about that for a minute? Really focusing on why we make irrational decisions as individuals.
Right. So when we look at when we look at how we purchase, right? If you look at the chain of decision making around what goes into buying something in your shopping cart today, and that could be a pair of jeans. These decisions aren't just, okay, I'm buying toothpaste for the house. It's I'm going to be finding my future partner. I'm going to be, looking at wedding venues. Like every single decision has multi-layer of decision factors going into it that you can't just pinpoint. So marketing would love to be this easy. Oh, all right. Remember the time when you just walk through a store and you pick out what you want and you check out? Okay. Was there emotion involved in it? Is there latent thoughts around that product that now you're infusing into? Do you need to see how the product is being made? Is it being ethically constructed? So all of these factors start making the decision more distal. So each time you are now thinking of purchase and are trying to decide in your shopping cart which ones you want, it starts to create a paradoxical effect, right? So it starts to kind of disable you to make choices, so that cart will remain in queue for a bit till you finally have some other point of trigger to actually purchase through.
You
So
know, when
that same way that we're going through factoring on decision making, right? That same decision making chain also plays out in the employee, when you're in an employee setting, right? Because what our research during COVID-19 showed was that traumas were overlaying a lot of what employee experiences were, right? And we'll get into that in the future, because we we like to say that a lot of this stuff was created by COVID-19, but clearly there were a lot of already pre-existing conditions in the environment that needed to be challenged that weren't. And we'll go more into the crux of some of the key findings of the research and what direction we started to take as a company. You're muted. You're muted.
it
Okay.
says I'm not. Okay, you can hear me now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. So this irrational behavior really reminds me of why what we see in recruiting, and how candidates are interviewed and then hired. Can we could can we talk about what happens in the, as far as on the recruitment side of and hiring, when we look at numbers around diversity, and the filtering out process? Like, why do we see candidates that don't meet the job description all of a sudden getting the job? Like, what's going on? Because it never makes sense to us if you were highly qualified or overqualified. What's really going on in those organizations?
So I think now what's happening is companies are now having to over index, right? So once they once they are over indexing, they're still also leveraging a certain portion of that workforce and attrition rate. So now, well, recent, last couple of years, the ghosting phenomena has structured different HR practices around how much you try to cover that risk, right? So what we're seeing now is, fortunately, you're going to get parity with skill set, right? The education part, that's not playing so much into factoring for some positions, right? I mean, clearly the professional level, that you can't avoid. You can't have a rocket scientist who, maybe did a certificate program in how, you do drones. So so I think that there's a lot of risk and mitigating against a lot of those factors that are occurring now. But certainly when we look at how we're leveling a lot of these playing fields for Black and Latino employees, is that yes, these certificate programs are being offered at larger scale to us. Obviously, we're not broadcasting, and we're not disseminating all of those places as much as we should, but at least we're seeing that, like the skill level and education level that used to have disparity is kind of just burgeoning on, trying to get to a place where yes, you'll see some kind of like beginning of equity for Black and Latino, outside of always the lower contingent level, entry level, service level, those placements. So I'm hopeful. Well, the other thing too is
There we go. Yes, today it is doing whatever it wants to over here. Gotta love technology. So I like the way you focus on that, and we see this often behavior as we look at the diversity trend numbers, as we see the progression or the lack of career progression. Like you said, the companies create these programs to diversify the talent pool, but as you see from entry level to management, the filtering out process. And if you haven't looked at any of the McKinsey reports, they literally show, like, even for white men to white women to women of color, how that filtering process goes. And you see way more white women in management roles than you even see for women of color. And I think it's really important to understand that irrational behavior in the process, and see it in a data aspect, but also breaking it down like you do in the behavioral aspect on an individual level. So I think that's really important to, if you don't think it's happening, you can look at your data inside your organization and then back it into what are individuals doing, as far as their behavior.
right, right. I mean, attrition rates, right? That's a clear indicator of. So when we conducted our study, we collected data during 2019, starting February 2019, and we cut it at, I think it was like March 2020, like no. February, we cut it off in 9 months. And all right, so some of the key findings there was that about so we were structuring transition plans for COVID, right? So these companies weren't sure what kind of, obviously we were all quarantined, right? We were all going through these different things. So this is where I talk about we were running triple pandemics, right? So we had a disease pandemic, we had a racial pandemic, and we had a mental health pandemic. So the racial pandemic has been centuries long, and mental health been blowing up for 20 years, and we in the US lack capacity to even serve the demand. Now imagine the demand, an explosion that was going to occur after quarantining, after all of the conditions that were placed on human beings during COVID-19, right? So let's just treat COVID-19, because you could isolate that, right? Isolate COVID-19, come up with these hybridized plans, come up with these remote plans, come up with these, variations on how you want to structure your workforce, right? But the funny thing is, when we were conducting these studies, after after one full year of doing it, we looked back and we thought, you know, 60% of the companies that we were working with were not reaching out to their employees to ask their opinions of what it would look like if you had these things. We explored many things, right? Caregiving, what kind of incentives. We explored all these things to make, but you know, no one sat down with any kind of universal approach of saying, okay, outside of a survey, right? A survey is not sufficient to find out what kind of life altering events are going to be occurring for you, right? It's not just the commute; it's a host of other things that that you're now factoring into your life, right? So that was the first thing, is that okay, that we all learned that, right? And we learned that behavioral science could actually go in and do a much more qualitative, investigative, exploratory study, right? But the other thing too is we've we also were looking at the when we isolate just for COVID-19, we found trauma was occurring at higher scales, not just because of anxiety, right? We had pandemic anxiety, we had pandemic depression, we had all of these normal reactions to an abnormal circumstance that was experienced globally, right? Okay, so some of the some of the key findings for our work was that we were examining brain fog, because what we thought is, all right, we're already seeing disease occur, but what about those that are not COVID-19 diagnosed? What is happening for their productivity, right? Because to me was much more curious. So what we found was, we spoke to 400 CEOs, founders, and ranging in employees, ranging within like executive suite to mid management, and we found that something like 92% had symptoms of brain fog, not COVID diagnosed cases. This was just the pressure of working under these conditions. Now, imagine that was at the early phases. People weren't being treated, right? So that's one of the things that we have to always look at too is, Black and Latino people have patterns of care, and mental health is the most underutilized, right? So you could offer a huge benefits packet and offer all types of, you could annualize free care. And if we don't feel that there is some kind of real need, it will just go underutilized, right? So a lot of our work started focusing on, well, what types of ancillary support and what types of wellness programs could you wrap around your employees to get them to improve their you could reverse brain fog, right? But you have to start early to change that. So those were some of the different kinds of questions we went in and looked at in different companies, and looked at how to really start addressing the triple pandemics that were occurring simultaneously. So those are some use cases around how behavioral science gets used. Obviously, like what we do is we try to tailor interventions and randomized controlled trials to figure out what things would be most ideal in each setting, right? So that's the other thing too, is that there are some best practices and standardized interventions, but still, since we're all going through new terrain and there's not really archival data on previous diseases, right? We have HIV, which is a good case to look at in terms of what types of policies needed to be incorporated, like, and what kind of advocacy needed to occur, and what kinds of support services. So from that perspective, it's good, but we really had nothing. So we're all kind of developing out very very specific and very tailored interventions for each different type of organization each time we go in. But yeah, that those are some of the key ways that behavioral science gets utilized in divisions, in HR settings, in different silos of different companies. Those are just addressing employee wellness and workforce wellness.
And I like the focus on mental health and how we see that it's really a huge stigma in the Black and Hispanic community, in Latino community, to discuss it, much less getting help. What I do like about the younger millennials and Gen Z, they openly discuss mental health and going to see a therapist. And what I mean is, all over Twitter, they will share. And now we're seeing more platforms where you can find women of color therapists, Black male men therapists. And I think it's really important to, when we talk about mental health, to present it in our communities in a certain way. And what I mean by that, I had a virtual summit earlier this year for women of color in STEM. We target Black, Latina, and Indigenous women in STEM. And having a Black woman therapist come in and say, hey, these are also ways that you can manage your mental health without talking to someone. These are reasons to talk to someone before you are really in depression, or what can depression look like. And even utilizing different social media platforms to say, hey, Black women are often depressed, but because we are high functioning, you can be high functioning and highly depressed at the same time, and not understand that nobody in your community may support you. What do you do? How do you identify it? And how a lot of times white therapists aren't able to help you. And so, really having these more open discussions about it. And I think oftentimes we close out the discussions, but I think being consistent, showing that what good mental health is in the communities, and what isn't good mental health, because sometimes we're around other people and we all are having mental health challenges, and so it looks normal, but it really not, because we're dealing with so many different levels of trauma.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Part of the research that we explored was this very same thing, right? It's microaggressions and our adaptations and our resilience towards things. So there's a lot of theory around the effects of racism on mental health, right? And the key drivers that we can really look at is how microaggressions impact cumulatively over time on a person's functioning. So a portion of those microaggressions will adapt to, and a portion of them will constantly be triggered by, right? And in the workplace, it there are key examples that we could always point to that occur all the time for different groups. And it it does impact and does erode at your self-esteem. It does erode at your levels of tolerance and your levels of functioning. So what I would say is, like, when we think about how microaggressions that causes chronic stress, right? And it does cause levels of reactionary behavior, and it can look like depression, right? But just the other cycle of microaggressions is that, yeah, you're not necessarily dealing or negotiating through them. So you are essentially just reacting and absorbing it, right? But not displacing any of it. You're not coping with it. You're not dealing with it so to eradicate it in your life. You're just coping and adapting to it, right? We're just dealing with, okay, this is how people are, right? It becomes a normative thing for people of color, right? And women too. When let's look at some like real tangible examples of microaggressions that we could all relate to. All right. Women are constantly triggered by this very thing. When a man does mansplaining, right? We have been adapting to it. We hear it, and all we do is roll our eyes when we see it. We didn't ever address it, but now we're like, unnecessary, right? So things like that is helping us cope and reduce the adaptation and tolerance level for what is suboptimal, right? So these microaggressions, that's one. That's okay. That's one. women can universally say, oh, right, to that. But think about it when we're in the workforce. Black and Latina women, indigenous women, Asian women, your food, the smell of your food, your hair, your clothing, like your your last name, how you look has to constantly become a talking point, right? But we've adapted to it. We're just like, okay, this is how it is. But that's suboptimal, right? And cumulative, I mean, right? But you see how we just been like, okay, this is just a normal course. This is completely normative, right? But that erodes. Why should we have a tolerance level? We have tolerance level for pain, right? Tolerance for all types of things, and then wonder why we're such a reactionary people, why we're easily triggered, right? And why, when even when you look at leadership and it's male to female, why there's sometimes discrepancy in that communication cycle. But it could be because you already off put, because you assumed that she wasn't smart enough to get what you were saying, right? And that you came, you're the person there to now really set the standard, right? Where she had already with her whole team. Like, so it's things like that. But anyway, the long-term effects of that cumulative cycle happening for us is what creates that, lowered functioning, right? Lower tolerance level, reactionary behavior, dramatics, right? Like all these things, right? Or right, this is ultimately what happens along that cycle. Okay, enough of that experience makes you leave. Right?
Absolutely. It does. And I'm sitting here thinking about the things women have shared with me, my own experiences, because you know how you said we roll our eyes. Even when we go to set boundaries, people will tell us we can't, well, you can't do that. And they're like,
Yes.
why? Because they want you to continue to take on those aggressions. And it's like, and so we come in, and I always get this, I always push back. They're like, you can come in and be your authentic self. It's a safe place. And we're like, no, it's not, because your aggressions are going to show up, and they show up in so many different ways because you've normalized being able to do that to marginalized people. And us and our responses, like you say, I know on the behavioral side, you're seeing it as spontaneous reaction, but it's a buildup. It's like unfortunately, it's a buildup. It's pressure building up in that pipe, and at some point, it's going to come out. And that's a lot of times where we have that, like you said, mental health problems, and they're seen as an outburst. And I hate the word micro. It's an aggression. Is an aggression. Is an aggression. And so I think it's important. I prefer to remove the micro part because it's an aggression regardless, and really focus on why are you doing it, how do we get people to stop doing it, because at the end of the day, the impact it has on us, we can't, how do we get people to stop that as far as on a behavioral science side. And I know it's a lot more to that, because it's that their mental health, the reason they're doing it to marginalized people, but also is that a power dynamic and structure that has to be dismantled so that they don't do it. And what I mean is, um, how certain white leaders manage people, and I hate using the word leaders, white managers or management direct people opposed to black managers. And because what we see is black managers oftentimes will remove barriers for their employees to do their jobs. Wherein a lot of times white management will add barriers. Well, you need to prove this, or you're not worth it,
Mhm.
shouldn't be here. And I think it's really important to understand why people are in those adding in those aggressions and those barriers in the workplace. And I know we don't have time for that, but it just came to mind, like the leadership styles are very different between Black people, Latino, and white people, but Black people and Latinos have a very similar way of managing their teams and their people. And I often look at the way they do it as management, and we've had these discussions before, in that especially as Black people, we show up in the world a different way, and so we look at environments a different way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we look at the power structure and dynamics going on in rooms. We also look at how do we have to approach somebody sometimes, and we do that often, as we say, what is it, when you change your personality in the workplace. I can't think of the phrase right
Code
now.
switching.
Yeah, code switching. And
Mm-hmm.
so as part of our coping mechanism. And then what code switching, what impact does that have on our mental health? There's so many things I know we didn't get to talk about,
Right.
but it's important, I think, just to bring them up, because I know a lot of people may be having these same thoughts as me as we're having this discussion. Those are things that are further impacting marginalized people than white people may realize, or white cisgender men may realize, that really need to be addressed. And so let's go back to the management part, because I think that's really key part of what we're seeing in the workplace, which is how women of color, or BIPOC leaders lead differently, and
Mm-hmm.
how does that help when it comes to, uh, not come to, but what do you think is behavior, the time that their management styles to behavioral science? What do you think is driving that?
So, so when we're designing our interventions, all right, one of the things that you talked about earlier is exactly how some of these interventions are designed, and some of the stuff that we learned from COVID-19 in the height of the racial epidemic in the U.S., right? So one of the biggest deficits for a lot of the companies was to find practitioners of color, right, to address their workforce, because what was happening is that you had white practitioners on staff but unable to deal with the cultural differences between the Black and Latino employees, right? So one of the things that we try to look at in behavioral science is, okay, yes, given that there's different leadership styles with African diasporic people, because when we're talking about cultural worldview, Black and Latino styles are very similar. And then, white and Asian, like you could see that the leadership patterns kind of like fall into only like 2 or 3 different realms of worldview. So what we looked at is, okay, now what types of reactions are you going to get when you had a Black male delivering an intervention to their Black female staff? What did you see? And then we compared it to when it was a Black male talking Black male, Black female to Black female. We also paired it with, okay, when it was white male to Black employees, when it was white male to Latino employees, what were all the differences, right? And we found that the better outcomes was when you paired the similar phenotype and similar ethnic and racial group offering the intervention and receiving the intervention. So when you had better results, and you had better long-term results too. So we were seeing that the effects of the intervention lasted more than 4 months when it was delivered, paired racially or paired ethnically, right? But we also saw a similar along white people. When white women were more triggered when they were being told and being led by a white male practitioner, right? So we see that the same dynamic occurs for all racialized groups, all ethnic groups, right? If we can identify the triggers of why these underlying traumas are occurring, which I like that you said, let's not try to sugarcoat it and call it a micro. It's causing trauma, and we're suppressing the trauma, and it is definitely evolving into other conditions in the future, right? So we're not even going to go there, right? Because we want to focus on wellness, and we want to prevent any kind of future cognitive decline. So, when we look at all of these things, some of the ways that would be best served for when people are hiring behavioral scientists is to really have them examine some have them do deep dive and exploratory studies with the employees to figure out, start off with a qualitative ethnographic observation, just to figure out what is it that job dissatisfaction could be attributed to, what anxieties are existing, that are not part of COVID-19, because even though we're not focusing so much on COVID-19, it's still out there. We're still getting infected, and now we're going to be seeing a lot of more cross contamination with other conditions like flu and different things as we go along, because immune systems have now dropped even further, right? So one of the things that definitely we would always recommend is for this qualitative inquiry with the employees, right? To find out what are some of the job dissatisfaction, what kinds of anxieties are still being unaddressed in the workforce, and just plain exploratory. The other thing that we would recommend is that one, structuring either DEI programs that you realize you may need further services with. We recommend that it's not a part-time / hybrid program for an employee already at a position, and now, okay, you're tapped, you go also provide this as part of your job, have them volunteer for it. No. Have standalone programs. Same thing with behavioral science. Start off with consulting, but don't make it, the psychologist that's on staff, make them part-time or volunteer to start examining some of these things. Just identify just full dedicated staff to that. So that way they can examine and explore all of the different iterations of the interventions, the iterations of the data, and iterations of the programs that they're going to eventually make and build. And then the final thing that I would say is, obviously behavioral science is starting off with a pilot, right? And in that first year, it will be a pilot program to see what kinds of interventions produce the best overall for the workforce, right? And not just in terms of productivity, but you'll also see so much cost gain, right? And profitability, right? So start off with that pilot, right? And then build into more sustainable models using those interventions. And what I would say is by the fifth year, you should already see that become the DNA of your culture. So thank you so much for having me, and I hope that people got a chance to look at how cool behavioral science can be, and ways that we could really begin to explore how to ameliorate and empower the workforce, start addressing some of these systems that are structural but can change if they're implemented in ways to start addressing them. It's like you said, Michelle, the younger generations are really looking to us to say, like, you have to move needles because we won't accept it, right? And that's there we need to also be looking at designing interventions with them, because we're building a future place with
Yep.
them in mind. They should be telling us, what are we doing wrong? Right? Maybe, there's many where I talk to Gen Z and they're like, drop the identity stuff. There is no identity. There's no, you know what I mean? Like, it's all intersectional, right? And you're like,
Wait, what? Confused?
no, it's right. You
I
know what I
mean,
mean?
they need to be open to listening and taking action upon what they're saying. And I absolutely agree with it. I know we could talk about that. We do talk about this often offline with each other. But
Yeah.
before we dig in deeper, where can people connect with you? Where can they find you? Because a lot of people I know are trying to figure out what to do to retain their employees. And I think this is a great way to start retaining your employees, because you're going to show them, number one, they matter to you, you care about them, and you're looking for ways to help them sustain mentally, which in turn is the lifeline of everything that they do and everything you need them to do within your organization. So how can people find you and connect with you?
Sure. So my site is clarissasilva.com, and I used to split time between my research consulting practice and my relationship private practice. But since COVID, I really focus on just the research consulting side. So you'll see the body of my work listed there. You'll also have access to my calendar and book sessions. You also get a lot of free resources. A lot of the research that I've published in different places are all on my website. So the original data is all on my website. The best way to reach out to me is, yes, through my site, but also if you'd like, LinkedIn is the best social network for me to reach me on. Um, yeah, those are the two main places that you could reach me at. And if you want quick questions answered, you could just send it to info@clarissasilva.com. You're muted again.
We're going to show that on the screen. If you didn't see it, so you can go to clarissasilva.com, and on LinkedIn, you can go to, or just search for Clarissa Silva or Clarissa Silva Solutions. So definitely, I think I'll pause it just in case if you need to take a screenshot of it, you can do that instead. Let me take something off and do it this way and now show you. So you can take a screenshot of that. Everybody, we both have, we think, easy to spell and pronounce names, but people can spell it different ways, or they do spell it different ways, however you want to take it. But you can definitely go to clarissasilva.com, and on LinkedIn, she's at linkedin.com/n/clarissa-silva.solutions. But definitely check out, connect with her. For even if it's not for, if you're not bringing, maybe it's something you want to discuss within your ERG or your organizational leadership team, management team, knowing you need to have these discussions and you need this help in your organization, definitely reach out to Clarissa. So thank you so much, Clarissa, for your time today. We will check. We will definitely be having more conversations like this in 2023, everybody. So be sure you follow me all over social, LinkedIn. I've got to say a word. I'm not going to say that word. LinkedIn and Facebook, I guess, is where we're going to say, and YouTube. So you can check us out on those three platforms. Everybody have a great week, and I will talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you so much.